I mean, I've heard all of these things. All of this, once again, resurrects this picture of disintegration. When the inner circle begins to point fingers and accuse their members of one or another actions that are treasonable, that's usually the beginning of the end. Mr. Putin has made it very clear they do not want to escalate to the nuclear level, but if we do, they will respond. And he said, in which case, we will, quote unquote, all. And he said, of course, we will go as martyrs to heaven. I suppose that's somewhat reassuring. But the point we need to understand is that in a nuclear exchange with the Russians, we'd lose 90 million people in an hour. Now, why would we even want to contemplate something that utterly ridiculous and stupid? I think we're playing with fire. And the Russians with conventional warheads or nuclear, but they certainly will not do so with nuclear warheads as long as we stay out of that. They can reach targets literally from the Arctic Circle in northern Norway all the way down to southern Portugal. There's nothing in that area they cannot reach and destroy. So we need to wake up. This is not something they want. This is something that we seem to be insisting upon. We'll not take anything seriously unless something like that happens.
Currently, the United States and its NATO allies persist in their fixation on dealing a decisive blow to Russia. They seem prepared to keep opposing our nation, using Ukraine as their last stand, so to speak. Simultaneously, Western nations are precariously teetering towards a direct military confrontation involving nuclear powers, carrying potential catastrophic outcome.
I also think that the ruling elites, and by that I mean that the people who currently govern in Europe and in the United States, are all members of the so-called globalist neocon class. And they are on very shaky ground. They are not going to last. A financial crisis and following that, a major economic downturn is frankly inevitable. I think they know that. And I think they know that they have one shot left, or at least they may think they do, to try and rescue themselves. And that is to maintain the fiction that they are righteous and moral, that everyone else is not, and that they are doing the Lord's work in Eastern Europe. They aren't. This is a very corrupt and dangerous ruling elite that has created a corrupt and evil state in Kiev that poses a threat not just to Russia, but to all of Europe. We refuse to accept that. As I say, the ruling class will not. And until the ruling class is replaced and gone, we're going to continue to deal with this nonsense because they control finance, they control the media, they control our economic destiny, at least at the moment. So the only thing that I see on the horizon right now that could derail us and keep us out of a direct confrontation with Russia that could escalate to the nuclear level is a financial crisis at home. And no one knows when that's coming. I always like to quote Nassim Taleb, who's the brilliant financier and analyst who coined the phrase or the term black swan. And he was asked very recently, I think it was on MSNBC, by the usual suspects who normally try to convince us that everything is great. Well, when is it coming? You say Armageddon is coming. When is it coming? And he looks at them and he says, it's over the horizon. It's over the horizon. Well, when is it going down? He said, I don't know, but it's coming and it's just over the horizon. Well, it's over the horizon. And we're getting closer to the horizon now than ever before. I really despair that there will be any sort of sober-minded thinking, especially in Washington or London. It looks like President Macron, after his meeting with President Xi, has begun to walk back some of his ridiculous rhetoric, because the French obviously have almost nothing to send to Russia. It's a bluff, which is the worst kind of thing that you can do. And the Russians are quite ready to call the bluff. I think it's we and the British who are the main offenders because we're ultimately connected and ruled by the same people. NATO is not going to survive this. NATO will go under. And, it's one of these things that, never has NATO appeared to be so strong as when it was very, very weak. And it never appeared to be weak when it was very, very strong. NATO is very weak now. And again, the Russians know that. They're not interested in exploiting it. Now, Xi came with a different agenda. First of all, he's trying to reinforce what President Putin is saying. He's trying to reinforce the truth, saying, this war is over. Stop fanning the flames of conflict. Stop pouring fuel on the fire. Let's end this thing so we can get back to business. And no doubt, I'm sure he has told everybody that the rail lines that are being built between China and Europe will run through Ukraine, not just northern Russia, but right through Ukraine, and will have a very beneficial economic impact, not on just Ukraine, but also Europe. What they want to do is go from Rochefort on the west coast of France, on the Atlantic, all the way to Beijing and Shanghai with high-speed rail to move goods, freight, services. That's what they want to do. And we view this as evil. Well, we should be doing the same thing in the continental United States between the Atlantic and the Pacific.
Right.
We're too stupid to invest in it. What they're doing makes sense. And I'm sure that was discussed. And the point is, we can't do business. We can't get anything done as long as this pointless war persists.
In short, Russia has lost. They've lost strategically, operationally, and tactically.
You certainly don't want to admit that you've lied through your teeth repeatedly. Remember that the Pentagon Papers were upsetting the people, not so much because they revealed some sort of state secret that was an existential threat to the United States, but because they told the truth. And the truth was the last thing that anyone in Washington wanted to get out during the Vietnam period. Everyone was trying to figure out, how do we save ourselves, from having been a prominent member of the cabal that caused this pointless and stupid war. I go all the way back to the letter exchange of notes and letters between McGeorge Bundy and McNamara, where they talked and said repeatedly, well, if we go into Vietnam, this is 1965, we'll probably lose, but it's the right thing to do. Michael Howard talked about the intersection of conscience and power in politics. Well, at least as far as I can tell in the West, there's no intersection of conscience and power at all. No one seems to give a damn about the people of Ukraine. And that's what you see in Ukraine today. The Ukrainian people are destroyed. The state is withered and vanishing. Zelensky is done. It's not a question of if, but when he's gone. And that's true for the rest of his compatriots. And after he is finished in Rafah and completed his task in Gaza, which is to either kill or expel most of the population and utterly destroy it, he will turn his attention to Hezbollah and the northern border. I stand by that. I think we have to understand that Mr. Netanyahu believes what he says, and you need to take him at his word. He is in a war that he considers to be an existential fight for the Jewish people in Israel. Well, it's existential in the sense that he wants to establish their dominance in the region because he sees no alternative to that, which means that everyone that stands in his way, particularly the Arabs, have to be destroyed. It's very simple. So he's not going to back away from that. The timing of this, I think, is very interesting because this comes at a point in time when people thought, well, we're going to have some sort of negotiated settlement. And again, when I was asked about it, I said, no, there won't be any negotiated end to this. That's unacceptable. Anything that remains from Gaza that is not absolutely, completely subjugated or destroyed by Israel has no business existing as far as Mr. Netanyahu and his friends are concerned. So this was inevitable, but I think it's interesting that they waited as long as they did, I think, to create the impression that they actually gave a damn what Mr. Putin, or excuse me, what Mr. Biden says. But the truth is, I don't think they do. As long as he has control of the United States, and he does, and by that I mean the Congress and ultimately the White House for all intents and purposes, whatever Biden says doesn't matter. I think, frankly, we found that out with Donald Trump. What he wanted didn't matter either. When he wanted to pull troops out of Iraq and Syria, people lied to him and said, oh, yes, we're pulling out of Syria. And of course, nothing happened. There's a force at work here over which Netanyahu exerts real control and influence. As long as he's got it, he's going to exploit it. And he figures that he's got that at least until the election. And the closer we get to the election, the more power and influence he's likely to have over us, because the probability is very high that after the next election, some of that power will be gone and there'll be a readiness to turn away from the current course of action in the Middle East. And we should be prepared to do whatever is necessary against Iran. And said, all these senators agree with me. And the next day, he received $1 million in his campaign reelection from a PAC led by Bill Kristol. So money counts, money speaks. Money is infinitely more important than the lives of anyone anywhere outside of the United States. And the only lives that count in the United States are potentially those that could mass together and turn around and change governments through voting. But there hasn't been much evidence for that kind of thing happening. There is a lot of evidence that if you say the right things and do the right things, it can be very financially rewarded. Because I think there is an expectation that there will be dramatic change if he's elected. And when you see names like this show up as potential cabinet members, it should raise questions in people's mind about what is meant by change, if anything. But again, we don't know what's going to happen just over the next 2 or 3 weeks. If the British and the French do not cease and desist, if we do not signal our private acknowledgement that this is a lost cause, which we can do through someone like Ambassador Burns very easily, and then make provisions to withdraw some of our more vulnerable assets and people from Ukraine, then I think we could see a serious crisis on the scale of the Cuban Missile Crisis erupt this summer. The attitude is what we've described earlier. I do think that within the larger regional framework, the tectonic plates are moving, and we'll see more dramatic movement in the months ahead, to the point where suddenly Israel confronts something far more serious than Hamas, and much more serious in the sense that it could be regional, with terrible implications for the use of weapons of mass destruction. I hope I'm wrong, but I think that's probably on the horizon somewhere. I realize that this government in Washington, speaking as it does for the American people, has effectively said that it rejects any relationship with Moscow on the basis of conditions that we do not set. In other words, unless the Russians all agree to adopt whatever we tell them is appropriate for their society and for their government, unless they remove the people that currently govern them, unless they put their arms down, join hands and sing Kumbaya with us, we can't get along with the Russians. Well, sending this kind of money towards Ukraine at this stage signals to the Russians that any hope of a relationship with Washington is dead. And that's why Foreign Minister Lavrov, within the last 48 hours, was interviewed and asked what would happen if there were negotiations and whether or not Moscow was still receptive to negotiations. And he said, yes, we will be receptive to negotiations, but keep in mind two things. First of all, just because we negotiate, we will not stop fighting. We will continue until we have achieved all of our objectives militarily. And then secondly, and very importantly, we are not going to cease hostilities for even a brief period of time because we know that we are going to hold what we've won. Effectively, the facts on the ground have changed, and we are no longer willing to talk about trades in what kind of territory we're willing to surrender to you in order to have peace.
Right.
It's over. And we've made fools out of ourselves. And worst of all, we've made fools out of NATO. NATO looks weak and stupid. The Ukrainian state is ruined. Whatever emerges after this will be a rump state. And that rump state will effectively be a demilitarized zone, a DMZ. And in it will live Ukrainians that can tend to their fields and go about their lives, but there will be no military power that threatens Russia.